Thank you very much, Ian. Okay, hi everyone. As many of you know, and as Ian just introduced, I'm Gwen Nelson. I founded, along with my wife, Aspies for Freedom, and together we, apologies, together we set up Autistic Pride Day in the first place. I did speak last year as well, and this year I would like to speak again about an issue very important in my own life. So basically, as many of you may or may not be aware, I am transgender and a trans woman, and this talk will be covering the intersection between neurodiversity and gender diversity. Excuse me, one small technical issue. What does the effects? Apologies for that. Okay, so let's get into it. First of all, what exactly is gender and what is neurodiversity? I'm very confident that most of you will be aware already of what neurodiversity means, and obviously what this whole event today has been about. So I will hopefully not have to explain it in any detail. So let's look instead at what I mean by gender and the terminology related to it. Essentially, gender is the psychological and neurological aspects of your sex. It's what's in your brain, well, then in the rest of the body, it gives you the psychological side, the understanding of how your body should be in relation to your body's sex traits. Then on top of that, we also have your gender identity, which is what you consciously think of your gender and how you perceive it. For example, I myself have a gender identity of female or a trans or transgender woman. When I was born and for the first part of my life, it was assumed that I was a boy, but this was not accurate. I suffered from and still suffer from a condition known as gender dysphoria. That is what we call the distress when our gender identity does not match our body. To fix this, I have been taking hormone replacement therapy to feminise my body, and will also be having surgery to make my body feel more comfortable. I'm also currently doing speech therapy for voice training, aiming to feminise my voice more. And by the way, if my speech therapist is Watson, thank you for your help thus far and the advice you gave me for today. So anyway, moving on. The link between autism and gender dysphoria and between the concepts of neurodiversity and gender diversity. Essentially, for many years, since at least the 90s, it's been well established that there's a large overlap between the transgender and autistic communities. Currently, we don't actually know why this is. There is likely some kind of underlying biological cause for it, but whatever the underlying biological cause, in most people's view, it does not matter. There's been things before such as Simon Baron Cohen's extreme male brain view, for example, which is that autistic brains are essentially over-masculinized in the room. However, this has never been proven of solid evidence and would contradict the presence of so many transgender women in the community. So, personally, I would be inclined to say that the biological cause does not matter. And in fact, if we found out biological cause, just like if we found a biological and genetic cause for autism, that would be a major problem. Excuse me one moment. Apologies again. Yeah, as with autism, if we were able to find the genetic or other biological cause behind gender diversity, which would also and behind more general LGBT and queer and gay identities, it could cause a problem because it could be used as a form of eugenics in much the same way as we have always feared about autism. It could be used to eliminate that particular group of people. So, I'm sorry, again, I said this talk is about the link and overlap between gender diversity and neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is the concept that whatever way your brain works, it's okay. It's okay to be different neurologically and to think differently. We all have our own unique style of thinking. We all have our own unique brain wiring. If you were to take my brain and put it into your body, then it would be like moving me into your body. Each of us is unique, and our brain wiring is unique. And it's only if it actually causes an actual problem that that should ever be changed in any way. That is the basic concept of neurodiversity. But we have different ways of thinking, and we have our own unique profile of strengths and weaknesses, and we should accept and celebrate those strengths. Now, there is also a related concept I'd like to introduce you all to. Two, in fact. First, that is the idea of bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is the right to decide what happens to your own body. Basically cover things such as requiring consent to medical practices, also it covers things like sexual consent. Anything happening to your body, you have the right to consent or refuse consent for. A more obscure related right is a concept known as morphological freedom. This is the right to decide how your body should be modified if you wish to modify it, what form the body should take. The idea is that if you wish to modify your body in any way, you have that right. It's your body, you own it. These ideas both tie in to a much older concept known as self-ownership, with many basic human rights rely upon. It's why things such as slavery, for example, are no longer allowed in our society because it's a violation of the principle of self-ownership, and in particular, it often violates the principle of bodily autonomy by forcing people to do something. Now, currently, even though these concepts are very important to human rights, they are not actually classified as human rights. To a certain degree, bodily autonomy is, but not perfectly. It is not as strong a protection as many of us would desire. But we do have some degree of protection in law against people doing things to our body without consent. Things like assault of all forms. You're not allowed to assault someone with a weapon. You're not allowed to perform sexual activity without consent. You're not allowed to perform medical procedures without consent. In fact, even when incapacitated in an emergency, you still cannot perform a medical procedure on someone without their consent, even if it would save their life. The way the law gets around this is we have what's called presumed consent. That is, if the person was conscious and rational, we would assume that they would want life-saving measures to be taken. However, if someone signs an advance directive stating that they don't want certain medical procedures to be performed, that has to be respected by law, because the law states that we have the right to reject certain medical treatments, even if it could endanger our life, unless you are actually classified mentally incompetent. And this is something I will come back to. Now, another right that is not currently actual law, but which many people wish to see made a human right in law, is the concept of cognitive liberty. This ties directly into neurodiversity. Cognitive liberty is the idea that you have the right to think the way you think and not have your mind externally modified by force. You can think of this as you have the right not to be brainwashed, almost. Imagine some advanced technology that is able to reach into a human brain and physically modify it, remap all the neural connections, and literally physically change your mind. The concept of cognitive liberty would say that that is not allowed unless you have given informed consent to it. Now, this is obviously relevant to neurodiversity because it says that, for example, a hypothetical cure to autism could not be forced upon us. At the same time, a cure being forced upon us would be a violation of bodily autonomy and arguably of morphological freedom because it would be a bodily modification, in this case to the brain, but still a modification of the body. So, cognitive liberty and neurodiversity and bodily autonomy and morphological freedom all sort of tie together. These are very important rights. If we want to preserve neurodiversity, we must preserve bodily autonomy, morphological freedom, and cognitive liberty. Now, I said this talk is about the intersection between gender diversity and autism, neurodiversity. So, what does I mean by that? I will explain that now. Essentially, as I explained earlier, your gender is what the psychological and neurological aspects of your sex are. If we think of sex traits as being things like which chromosomes someone has, what hormones they have, what genitals they have, secondary sex traits such as softer skin in females, thicker skin in males, patterns of fat distribution, patterns of hair development growth, things like male pattern baldness. There's lots of these secondary sex traits. And your gender is basically how your brain perceives both how your body should be in relation to those traits and what role you would like to take in society, how you would like others in society to treat you. But primarily, it is about your personal identity, what is in your own mind. When you ask yourself, who am I, what am I, that is a question of personal identity, and it is part of the brain. So this leads on to the idea of gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is the distress felt when what's in the brain or the mind, in terms of gender, does not match up with the physical body or things like social roles. An example would be feeling uncomfortable with having certain genitalia. That is an example of bodily gender dysphoria. Then there'd be social dysphoria, would be things such as being called the wrong name, the wrong pronouns, being misgendered, and so on. And so far as we know from the actual historical evidence, gender dysphoria was first taken seriously by doctors sometime around the 1940s in the, I apologise to everyone for my bad pronunciation here, the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft in Germany. I've actually just looked at Amy here because she knows German. I probably pronounced that wrong. Anyway, to my own knowledge, and as far as I can tell, to the general knowledge that we have as a species, that's the first place where we actually had doctors working on addressing gender dysphoria. And at first, many doctors finding that this problem of what was then called transsexualism existed, where there were men or people who they thought were men were being seen as men, but who felt like they should be women. But this institute in Germany looked at that and for the first time said, hey, what if maybe we can resolve this problem by altering their body instead of altering their mind? Up until that point, again, the term transsexual is what was used back then. It's not as common now, but I will use it in this context. So up until then, transsexuals would have been assumed to be suffering a delusion or mental illness. And in fact, many people still assume that. But again, this institute in Germany for the first time looked at it and thought, what if it's true? What if their brain does not match the body? And so, for the first time in history, they actually began giving actual surgical interventions and hormones to people in order to try and resolve their gender dysphoria by fixing the body. In fact, that is still the approach now. If you look here, this is one of my medications that I use. It's injectable estradiol, or estrogen, the primary female sex hormone. I've been taking that since September 2018, and I'm not going into all the details of me personally, but it has made various changes to my own body that have made me much more comfortable. So, we have this idea that the mind and the body can almost sort of disagree with each other. And we can, if that happens, there's two ways to fix it. You can fix the mind, or you can fix the body. The thing is, mind, many would argue, is the person. I personally do not believe in any kind of supernatural soul, for example, but I would argue very strongly that the brain inside our skulls is the equivalent to our souls. It is who you are. Every single thought, feeling, memory, experience, it all goes through the brain. Electrical signals flowing from your sensory nerves, they go up through the brain, they get processed in various ways, muscle signals come back out, there's also hormonal signals come back out. It's a very complicated organ, the most complicated organ in the body, because it is us. And again, under the concept of cognitive fluidity, if it's to be modified, it must be with consent. However, most of those who suffer gender dysphoria would feel that they don't want their gender changed, and in fact, evidence shows that, at least with current technology, that is not even possible. They would want their physical body changed and their social role changed. I can speak to that myself in trans. I want my body feminized. I want to be treated in society as female, and I'm taking steps towards that, but very slowly. Now, the other approach, which has been proposed many times throughout history and is generally considered deeply unethical, is to attempt to forcibly modify the mind. Now, if you remember, the brain and the mind basically is the person. if you're trying to modify the brain, the person's mind, in order to make it accept the body, in some senses, it is like murdering that person and putting someone else there. This is also my view of any hypothetical cure for autism. So you can see there is a close sort of overlap in that regard, in that in the case of autism and other conditions that would come under neurodiversity, we want adaptations for our weaknesses and otherwise to be left alone and to be allowed to be our own unique selves. So in the modern day, ethical doctors do not attempt to treat gender dysphoria by modifying the brain, and in fact, in various nations, doing so, even attempting to do so, is actually illegal because all the evidence shows that it does not work and is essentially a form of torture. If you excuse me. Now, that is another practice that again ties into autism here. In fact, the man who originally invented conversion therapy for gay people also was the man who invented ABA for autistics, using much of the same ideas. Essentially, Ivor Lovaas invented the whole concept of conversion therapy, at least as it's practiced in modern times in pseudo-medical contexts. Throughout history, there have been a lot of attempts to use religious elements such as praying the gay away, things like that, or as related to trans issues, praying the trans way, but people would engage in religious ritual and prayer and hope that God would intervene or some other such nonsense. So we have a brain being different, and we have people trying to change it. That alone seems to show that there is a big connection between neurodiversity and gender diversity, but it goes deeper than that. We are aware that there is an overlap between the general LGBT community and the autistic community, but on top of that, there is actually a current threat to the right of bodily autonomy for autistics and indeed our rights in general. And this is something that should be a concern to all autistics and people who consider themselves allies. Essentially, the argument goes that autistics are unable to consent to medical transition. That would mean things such as HRT and surgery, but only currently known actual effective treatment for gender dysphoria. And this is mainly done by anti-trans hate groups who are trying to stigmatise the entire field of trans healthcare by making up that they're exploiting people who are confused, meaning us, autistics. And they're relying on the idea that the general public does not understand autism. So, in the eyes of the general public, all we hear is the evil doctors are forcing experimental drugs and surgeries and blah blah. Of course, in reality, what is happening is that trans autistics, such as myself and such as various people I know, have every right to the same standard of treatment as anyone else for any form of healthcare, not just trans healthcare. And being trans and autistic does not mean that we are confused. It does, even if there is some kind of biological connection, meaning that if you're autistic, you're more likely to be trans, it does not matter. The underlying issue of gender dysphoria is still present, still deserves treatment, and we still deserve the right to consent medically. If you excuse me one moment. I'll apologize, I was reading my notes. I am looking at an example I wish to, so if you give me a moment. Okay. Essentially, the way that transition helps gender dysphoria can be made very obvious by looking at what people would normally call a timeline, so before transition and after. Now, after, you can see right now, in front of you, by looking at me now, before, I'll use my phone that's a bit simpler for various reasons, but that is me around 2016 or 2014, I think that was. And there's actually a stereotype with trans women and trans people in general that we take lots and lots of sulfates, and there are reasons for that, but that we've getting into. And as a result, many of us have favourite sulfates. This is one of my favourite sulfates. Now, if you compare to that, you'll see there have been quite noticeable. Some changes are quite subtle, but some of them are really noticeable. And one of the biggest changes is within the brain itself. The brain has androgen and estrogen receptors, just like other organs in the body. And it has been proven that estrogen in trans women increases the metabolism of serotonin, and it can also increase levels of neurosteroids, essential to promoting a calm, relaxed mood. Essentially, if you have the wrong sex hormones in your brain, you will feel depressed. If you have the right ones, you're more likely to feel happy. There are other factors, of course, but having the right hormone configuration in your body is beneficial to mental health. On top of that, with physical changes, to avoid being too crude, I'm not going to list them, but I'm sure we can all imagine. The physical changes can make a very big difference to comfort levels in themselves as well. So we have the desired changes in the brain, to general neurochemistry, that improves mood and functioning, and then we have desired changes to the body. But again, there are people attacking our right in this regard, saying that we do not have the right to consent to medical treatment. And the argument they are using is something that should concern everyone, because the argument they're using is that we are incompetent and cannot consent. If we cannot consent to medical transition because we are mentally incompetent, what else can be denied to us? What other rights can be taken based on the principle that we are not mentally competent and that we are not fully adult or not fully human? Sadly, there are hate groups that target every minority group. This includes, of course, transgender people, and it includes autistics. There is also a concept that many of you will be familiar with of intersection. The word originally comes from set theory, something that hilariously I found that transphobes don't understand, but that's off topic. Imagine you have two sets of objects in sets, and the intersection is a set containing objects that are in both sets. In sort of social justice and other activism, it has another meaning, which is someone in two or more different minority groups. For example, I myself would be in the autistic minority group, transgender, female, and gay. That would be an intersection I have myself of. But let's focus entirely on the intersection between autism and gender dysphoria or being transgender, which I must clarify are not the same thing for records. You can be transgender without having dysphoria, but that is a topic that is probably best discussed during questions at the end of this talk. So this intersection is especially at risk because transgender individuals who do suffer dysphoria very often need access to medical transition and treatment. Without it, dysphoria can get extremely bad. I can tell you myself, it can get to absolutely hellish total states if left untreated. And there are some extremely bad traumatic memories I have myself, and that pretty much any trans person will be able to tell you that they've had traumas in their life, because dysphoria itself is traumatic. Society's response to being trans is traumatic. And then you throw autism on top of that, you have more discrimination based on being autistic, but you also have discrimination based on being transgender, and you have discrimination sometimes from small elements of both groups saying, oh, you can't be trans because you're autistic, you can't be autistic because you're trans. And it's that intersection which is being targeted mainly by anti-trans hate groups. And thankfully, to date, Autism Speaks and others have not gone in on this. But in their attempts to stop transition for all trans people, they are targeting autistic trans people in particular, saying that due to our condition, we are not able to consent, and that it's therefore some kind of abuse. They started off saying this with children, they've now moved on to campaigning to ban transition for all adults under 25, and pretty soon they're going to start arguing to ban for all adults. But before getting that, we've started off saying that it's to be banned for all autistics. And in fact, there was a court case a while back it was a young woman named Kira Bell who thought that she was a transgender man, went through the whole process, and was sadly one of the small minority who regret it. Rather than accept that and seek help and move on with her life, she decided to go to court to try and ban anyone else from ever having that same access. And the Christian fundamentalist lawyer who handled the case and was also deeply involved with various hate groups, including groups like Autistic Pride Alliance, that some of you will know of, basically jumped on it and managed to get a court order banning puberty blockers, which are drugs used to do what they sound like, to block puberty. And the justification used there was that they can't consent, and it's totally impossible for them to ever consent. The judge said that they can consent if it's evaluated by a court force and there's a court order granted, but to date the NHS have not applied when it was court orders, and in practice basically banned trans healthcare for everyone under 18. Now that was their first goal. They wanted to move up to adults, however that is much more difficult. So their next sort of attack was to target autistic adults, saying that, well, this is an adult group who can't consent because they're just confused or all kinds of other nonsense. Now, obviously, we all know that's not true. We all know who we are and that we're not just confused and stupid, but that is the argument they're using court and are still using to try and sway people to their side, including politicians. And if that becomes law and the precedent is set, it will not just affect trans autistics, it will affect all autistics, because it will be a precedent in law saying that we are not mentally competent, we do not have the right to consent to big life-changing medical decisions at all. So, my motivation for this talk is essentially that I want the wider community, the autistic community and the trans community, and of course those in both, to come together and oppose it as a unified voice. Because, as I've just explained, even if you're not transgender yourself, if you get a precedent set that autistics cannot consent because we're mentally incompetent, that will cover all autistics. Now, recently I began setting up a new website and with forum and so on to discuss this. For various reasons, that hasn't taken off, mostly some personal issues on my part. However, I've now got some fresh motivation to ask the community to get together, whether it's under the group I started or however it works, in order to protest against these hate groups and to try and stop this. If only for a simple reason that we can't allow the rights of trans autistics to be taken away. I have a very selfish reason for this, in that for me personally, I have a concern that they may be able to block surgery for trans autistics before I get a chance to have surgery myself. And that is honestly a thought that really, truly scares me. I don't know if anyone on the YouTube chat right now is trans as well. If you are, you will probably understand the fear I'm talking about, the fear of never being able to actually finish your transition and to fix certain things that you feel like sort of already been fixed when you were born. It's a deeply painful subject, and the wait for these surgeries can be years long. And to wait all those years and then have it denied could be absolutely devastating to mental health. I know in my case it would be very, very devastating. But even if that is not a concern for you for whatever reason, but it's still a very valid concern that it could cause this precedent that we cannot consent. So that is my plea to the community, that we work together on this new attack on all of our rights. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening to this. I am going to go on the YouTube chat now and see if anyone has any questions, or if Rachel or Ian, either of you around, if you could relay questions to Zoom, that would be convenient.
Sure.
So,
If anyone has any questions on the YouTube channel, please read them out. Gwen, there's going to be a slight delay because obviously there's a delay between the Zoom
yeah,
stream.
I can see I've got the YouTube stream running here in the background. Yeah. I assume that was you doing that, Ian.
No, I didn't do that.
Oh, don't know why one. Okay, Rachel, would you like to?
Oh, it's probably just because I haven't got video on. It's probably
okay, yeah.
That's better.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions on this general subject, let's go. I have noticed some of the people in the YouTube chat are also trans, which is not surprising considering the overlap. But especially for those who are not trans, who you could ask other people in the chat, you could ask myself. Let's see. Okay, I already see one question. I'll use my look. From Crows and Roses. What can we do as fellow autistics but also trans allies? There's two primary things you can do. And that is, first of all, whenever you see people making this argument, that trans autistics cannot consent stands up to the core of that on it, so that autistics are not stupid and confused as they seem to be advocate. And the second thing you can do is to take part in any legal campaigns and petitions, which we're going to have to start planning if we want to actually do this. Again, it's all sort of up in the air right now. We need to organise this fight and what we're going to do together. If anyone wants to talk to me and start discussing how to do that in a more organised fashion, my contact details are generally known to people. I'll just post them.
Have a look. Just do a question on the how to be a good ally.
I think I've already addressed that with.
Okay.
I also see that Anna Nicholson has offered to give the trans perspective to anyone who's wondering, as long as Mia and again myself, if anyone wants to ask questions about general trans issues, I'm here and so are others. But are there any questions about this specific issue of this intersection between trans and autism? Oh, Nikki, do you have advice for someone who is aspire trans? If by that you mean aspiring to be trans, first of all, what I would say is that it's not something you aspire to, it's something you are already from birth. You know, you may not look how you want to look for a long time, but it's already there in your brain, or at least there from very early childhood. If that was a typo and you meant someone who is aspy and trans, then it would depend very much on the individual. If anyone wants more specific advice, please reach out to me or to anyone else who is offered, and I will, or they will, if they will, talk over your options and what the first steps are and so on. The number one advice I would give is if you think that you are trans yourself, don't wait too long. Make sure that you are explore those feelings, take reversible steps at first, but don't just let it sit for years and years. That was my mistake and it caused me a lot of psychological trauma. But again, if anyone feels they may be trans and it doesn't suit what they're questioning, please reach out to me and I will help you. There's loads of others in the community as well. Okay, Mia Mantry. So, being trans is different for every trans person, like any group. Okay, how can we amplify individual voices and so individuals that talk to? Primarily by always making clear that if you put yourself forward as any kind of representative for any community, that you don't represent every single person within that community. I've had a history of autism rights activism, but I do not speak for all autistics, and I do not speak for all trans people. I do not speak for all trans autistics. I speak for myself, and I can give a general overview of what it's like for most of the community based on what I've seen. There's always that sort of disclaimer that it is only what I've seen or my own views. And that is how you do that in any context, whether it's the autistic community, the trans community, or any community, like the cat loving society. Well, cats are loved, and everyone's enjoying that one. Okay. Has anyone else got further questions?
If I could ask a question. Is there anything you can say to help or any advice you can give to a young person living with gender dysphoria growing up? I mean, being gay at a young age is difficult enough, but that seemed to be getting better. But I think the
Yes.
trans community is still very much
Well,
excluded.
for a while, it was getting better for the trans community, but that recent attention, although it allowed more people to become visible, like I feel it's what allowed me personally to come out finally. It's also led to more attacks from hate groups. Plus, for young person, I'd say it depends on what age. If we're talking about someone who's in their pre-teens, then they need to speak to their parents and explore getting the therapist, seeing if it's definitely true, and look up puberty blockers if they're appropriate and desired. But first of all, if they're in an environment that is not supportive, they need to reach out to an adult who is supportive. I would never suggest any queer young person out themselves to possibly bigoted parents, and sadly, some are. If their family are supportive, or at least they don't express open bigotry, then first of all, obviously you need to come out to your own, which can be difficult. And my suggested method is to write a letter or an email or social media post or whatever that puts less pressure on you, and say how you feel. Ask if you can see a therapist, but what's out that it's not what actually a conversive therapist or what they call gender critical. If they offer that, then you must not over. The results of that will be horrendous psychological trauma. But a professional therapist with a background in trans issues is who you would need to see. And if you feel that you need to transition physically, you make that clear to a therapist and ask for it every time. But the most important thing is to have a support network. If your family are not supportive, you need to find people who will be supportive. I would say that for older teens or people who are in their early 20s and no longer minors, it is much easier to get a support network that are not family. If you're a minor, it's very difficult for me to get advice because when I was at that age, I had no clue what to do myself. I basically repressed everything for years and ended up with a mess. But in all cases, the number one thing is to talk to a therapist, explore your feelings, take reversible steps, try dressing differently, presenting differently, try on different names, see how you feel. If it makes you feel happier, then discuss it with a therapist. If you feel like you desperately need to change certain things about your body, then you need to talk about medical transition sooner. It varies depending on individual situations, basically.
Thank you, Glenn. Do you have any more questions?
It doesn't look like any.
Yeah. If is there anything else you want to add, or we can take a short break?
What one last point I'd like to make is this group that I attempted to start myself did not work out. And I will be honest as to why. I was having mental health issues that caused me to sort of drop it. If anyone out there is willing to sort of take that up and carry it forward, then please get in touch. Essentially, what we have set up so far is a forum and basic website, and we had a plan of action. We've also got a Discord server, but that whole plan sort of halted because I was having a bad depressive episode at the time, and I don't know how to sort of continue it now. But it is an important cause. If the general community feels that it's better might be done in some other way, then let's discuss that. But basically, we need some kind of organised way to look at this issue and we start campaigning. And that would be my final word on this.
So I would encourage anyone who can help to get in touch with Gwen.
Yeah, that would be. I'll put my email address in the chat as well.
And like she says, this is an important campaign, not just for trans people, but for autistic people as well.